¿Cómo se nominalizan los verbos? Y eso, ¿cómo afecta nuestra forma de expresarnos? Ese es el tema de este episodio de Spanish Dojo. Hey guys, welcome to the latest episode of Spanish Dojo, where we're working to hone your Spanish speaking skills and make you sound more like a native speaker. In this episode, we're going to be talking about nominalizing verbs. What is this and why is it important? Well, generally, verbs show the action in a sentence, but sometimes you need to take a verb and make it act like a noun. When would you need to do this? Whenever it stands in as the subject or the object of a sentence. Because subjects and objects must be nouns or pronouns, which is really just a specific type of noun. Okay? So sometimes this is necessary, and the reason it's important is that it works a little bit differently between English and Spanish, and so it can trip you up when you try to speak Spanish and you start injecting some of these more English rules into your Spanish. It'll sound odd. So let's explore this topic a little bit. In English, there are two different ways that you can nominalize a verb. You can either put it in its infinitive or in its present participle. Those are the only two forms of a verb that can act like a noun in an English sentence. Here's an example. Think about a sentence such as, I like to read. Or this other sentence, reading is fun. In the first sentence, I've used the infinitive of the verb to read. Okay, the infinitive is to plus the verb, so to read. In the second sentence, I've used the present participle. In English, that's the form of the verb that ends in ing. Now, when a present participle acts as a noun, in English we also call it a gerund. That's another name it has, when it's acting like a noun only. But I'm going to use the term present participle in this video just to be consistent. So, the verb can be in the form of an infinitive or a present participle. Those are the only two forms that can act like nouns in English. Okay. Now in English, they're usually interchangeable. You could pick one or the other. It doesn't really matter. For example, the two examples I just gave, I could flip those around, and instead of saying I like to read, I could say something like I like reading. And notice there I used the present participle instead of the infinitive, but the meaning didn't really change. Likewise, instead of saying reading is fun, I could say to read is fun. That sounds a little formal, probably a little more formal than what we would be used to, but it's grammatically correct. You could make it a little more natural by flipping the order around and saying it's fun to read, but it's the same thing. The point is, these are the two forms that can act like nouns in English when it comes to nominalizing verbs. This is different from Spanish, and this is where people get tripped up. In Spanish, there is only one form of the verb that can act like a noun. So only one way to nominalize a verb, to put it another way. And that is the infinitive. Okay, if you're not familiar with what an infinitive is in Spanish, you should be, but if you're not, it's the base form that you learn starting out when you learn any verb. So if I take a verb like hablar, or leer, or vivir, it's that form that ends in AR, ER, or IR. Okay, that's your infinitive. And that's the only form of the verb that can act like a noun in Spanish. You cannot use the present participle as a noun in Spanish. What do those look like? Well, if I take those same three examples, that would be like the forms hablando, leyendo, and viviendo. So it's the ando or yendo form. It roughly corresponds to the ing form in English, but it doesn't always work in all the same ways. That's why you have to be careful about this. Okay? Here's the thing that I see people do from time to time, and it's because their English is bleeding over into their Spanish, and they're assuming the rules work the same way. You may hear things like, or you may have said things like, me gusta leyendo. Okay? I think this happens because we're thinking in our mind, I like reading, ing, so we think about the yendo form in Spanish. Okay? But this is wrong. It sounds unnatural, it sounds weird, and it doesn't match Spanish grammar. Another one, to use the examples from before, might be something like leyendo es divertido. Again, this is wrong, and it comes from trying to use the present participle as a noun in Spanish, which you can't do. To correct these sentences, use the infinitive. So instead of me gusta leyendo, which is incorrect, change that to the infinitive and say, me gusta leer. In the second example, instead of leyendo es divertido, it should be leer es divertido. Or you can flip that around too, just like in English, and say something like, es divertido leer. But the point is, you have to use the infinitive. You cannot use the present participle. Another place this happens, so far we've just looked at, direct objects or some sort of object of the verb. But really this applies to any object because objects have to be nouns. So if you talk about objects of the preposition, now these don't interact with the verb, but they're still objects. So take a preposition such as after. If I said something like, we went to the park after eating. Notice in English there I use the present participle. After eating. Eating is the object of the preposition after, and so it must be a noun, and I can use a present participle for that in English. So I would say after eating. Now this is one of the rare places in English where you can't use the infinitive. You have to use the present participle. It would sound weird in English to say we went to the park after to eat. Sounds odd. Normally these are interchangeable in English, but we do have a few quirks where you have to use one or the other. In Spanish though, this has to be the infinitive. Yet again, it's the same rule, right? So this should be what I hear people, let's back up a second. What I hear people say sometimes is, fuimos al parque después de comiendo. This is odd. It sounds very weird. It sounds horrible in Spanish. And it's because you're trying to take an English rule and superimpose it on Spanish grammar, and it doesn't work. So this, again, must be the infinitive. The proper way to say this sentence is, fuimos al parque después de comer. Always the infinitive. So that's essentially the rule. On one hand, it can be a pitfall because it's different from English. But on the other hand, this really isn't a very difficult rule because it's not as if you're faced with 2 or 3 different forms and you have to know how to pick the right one. The rule is simply that anytime a verb acts like a noun in a sentence, that is, if it's acting like a subject or an object, whatever kind of object that might be, the only way to do that is to use the infinitive. So there's only one form you have to remember. Just always use the infinitive for this purpose. And that's the topic for today. If this video was helpful to you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more content like this. And remember, if you're watching this after 2019, I've got a book available. You can find the link in the description that has these types of topics and much, much more that hopefully will help you refine your Spanish speaking skills even more. Look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you very much.